I want to bring you up to date with the final of our transatlantic trends slides, these findings from this survey of global public opinion when it comes to the war in Ukraine. And when we were talking about NATO kind of realigning itself, what we're finding here is a very sharp focus in terms of the respondents to the transatlantic survey, in terms of the percentage of people that want to see Russia prosecuted for war crimes, incredibly high. We saw earlier how the US's influence, its sphere of influence was dipping somewhat, but here very much Russia, war crimes persecution, 74%. And also fascinatingly, as we talk about whether Ukraine should join NATO, and the reasons why potentially at the moment is complicated and it can't, look at this, the Transatlantic Trends Survey very much saying the respondents, 46% do want to see NATO troops being sent to Ukraine. So just have that in the back of your minds when we listen to our next panel. And this is a panel that is in partnership with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung from Germany. This is shaping the long-term response to Russia's imperialism. Bear all this in mind when we're listening to our next panel. The Empire Strikes Back. Please join me in welcoming the moderator of this panel, TVN24 Business i Świat anchor Monika Tomasik.
Hello everyone, my name is Monika Tomasik and I have a great privilege to welcome you to the panel titled Empire Strikes Back, Shaping the Long-Term Response to Russia's Imperialism. Of course, there is a clear reference to Star Wars, except we don't want a sequel anymore. So this is having in mind some recent events and also events in the past, like war in Chechnya, war in Georgia, annexation of Crimea, shooting of aircraft of Malaysian Airlines, and annexation of further parts of Ukraine, territories of Ukraine, illegal annexation. There has to be the end for this harmful policy. So this is the question for our panel, how to put the end to this policy, to this harmful policy. And let me introduce my guests. So I'm honored to introduce Hanna Hopko, the head of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, former member of the former head of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, Verkhovna Rada, member of the International Advisory Council, Warsaw Security Forum, and International Center for Ukraine Victory. Hello, good to have you here. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Linas Linkevičius, former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania, member of the International Advisory Council, Warsaw Security Forum. Good to have you, sir. Mr. Norbert Röttgen, member of the Bundestag, CDU, former federal minister, member of the International Advisory Council, Warsaw Security Forum. Hello, good to have you. And on his right, Vladimir Milov, member of Democratic Opposition of Russia, associate of Alexey Navalny, former Deputy Energy Minister of the Russian Federation. Good to have you, sir. Okay, but let me start with the first question based on current situation. We are just after the illegal annexation of 4 Ukrainian territories and also the damage of Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipeline. Also, there are many threats from Putin of using the nuclear weapon. So, the first question to Mrs. Hopko, is this the game changer, the annexation of Ukrainian territories?
So thank you for having me today in this important discussion. And I would say that Russia's unlawful attempt to annex Ukrainian territories in 4 oblasts has no legal consequences. And actually, I'm very optimistic that the brave the Ukrainian armed forces will continue successfully liberating Ukrainian temporary occupied territories, and every inch of Ukrainian territory will be free from Russian occupiers. And I think the real game changer, or how to say, the strong position of Ukraine is recent address by the president of Ukraine to the indigenous peoples of Russia. And I would like to repeat his call, his appeal: fight to avoid death, defend your freedom in the streets and squares. So actually, I do hope that indigenous people in the territory of Russian Federation, in Siberia, in Caucasus, in Kalmykia, in Buryatia, in Yakutia, will not fall of the trap of partial mobilization and will not die in Ukrainian land. So I think this call on behalf of Ukrainian president is a really strong voice to avoid like a new death, and actually the game changer, this is not the game changer, yeah.
Okay, Mr. Milov, what do you think? Is the annexation the sign of strength, or rather the sign of panic? What is your assessment?
This is an absolute sign of weakness and panic, and I think you should look at this in a systemic context, because it was not just the annexation that was announced hastily by Putin, but he threw out the whole package. Once again, he elevated the nuclear threats. Second, he has done what he really hesitated to do for a long, long time. There's been rumors that he would announce mobilization of the population on the 9th of May and subsequently, but he hesitated because public opinion matters for him. And the public opinion reaction was strongly negative. But he threw all these wild cards simultaneously on the table, because what is a real game changer is the Ukrainian counteroffensive, because the Ukrainian army currently is not only well equipped and trained, but also motivated to recapture the illegally occupied territories. And Russian army doesn't have neither the motivation to fight and hold the ground, nor proper supplies, logistics, everything is in disarray. So what we saw in the Ukrainian offensive in Kharkiv region, what we're seeing right now in the south of Ukraine, is that once Ukrainian army starts advancing, Russian soldiers, lacking the motivation, lacking supplies, they just run. He sees that. I think it's not a surprise that he announced all this package, so to say, including the hastily managed referendums on illegal annexation immediately after successful Kharkiv counteroffensive. I think there's a clear connection in that.
And what do you think about this Zelensky address to the Russian people? Are they going to hear it just in case of the situation with mobilization? There is no big support for this mobilization. Russian people are fleeing Russia. They don't want to fight in this war.
It is a complicated topic, because obviously Ukraine is under an absolutely barbaric illegal attack by Russia. So, answering these questions, I have to show some restraint, but point is, the messaging of Ukrainian government and President Zelensky to Russians in the beginning of the war was much better and much more consistent than now. Because we see that, some hints about collective guilt and some other issues which really many people in Russia who are against Putin, against the war, they don't receive this message very well, because they hope for a better understanding of the situation that they find themselves in. So, well, obviously President Zelensky is very much watched and very popular in Russia, but I would suggest that the understanding of what is really happening on the ground in my country is a little bit more enhanced, both in the West and in Ukraine.
Okay, Mr. Röttgen, I would like to ask you, what about the damage of the Nord Stream pipelines? Is it a game changer for Germany?
No, certainly not. I have to admit that I cannot detect the sense in this destruction of the Russian gas infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, but certainly it has not. It's not in any way close to be a game changer, because the energy policy has been clear so far. There is no gas transport via Nord Stream 1. Nord Stream 2 has never become operational. I fought against this project for years, but now there is a consensus achieved in our country that Nord Stream 2 will never become operational. So it's the destruction of an infrastructure which has never been in use or was not in use any longer. So no, the facts haven't changed by that.
Okay, and the policy will change towards Russia or towards helping Ukraine?
The policy will change when?
With more equipment giving to Ukraine?
Yeah, I think this is what we have learned altogether, and have to learn, that the political changes and opportunities are a consequence and result of the military development. This is what we are seeing. And the military development, of course, and the huge and unexpected success of the counteroffensive, both in the east and the south, they are, of course, only possible because of the military support. Yes, and there could be more military support in order to accelerate the military success. This is what is an issue in our domestic debate. The opposition, I would say a majority of the Bundestag, of our national parliament, advocating for doing more, delivering more, effectively delivering everything we can, our industry and our national army. This is not the view of the government, particularly not of the Chancellor. There's also a debate within our government, but the Chancellor, of course, has the most powerful word in resisting the delivery of main battle tanks and other tanks. And I think this is the crucial point in the development to the military support of Ukraine, which will lead to the opportunity to achieve political solutions.
Mr. Linkevičius, how significant is the threat of using the nuclear weapon by Vladimir Putin? I'm asking you this question firstly because Baltic states, Poland, we are in the front line.
No, it is significant as everything, but we should understand that part of tactics of Kremlin is bluffing and really raising these issues where everybody is scared. And they will use that until everybody will be really scared and will listen. If not, they will invent something else. But that will be continued, and this is the case. When they feel this space where they can fill in with their rhetoric, with their propaganda, they will always do that. If they will feel that something is already settled and is irreversible, they will de-dramatize. Due to the time, I will not mention, but some points, for instance, I remember our membership in NATO, it was big noise, but I remember my discussion with, at that time, Defense Minister Sergei Ivanov in 2002, when he asked me whether we will be members of NATO next year. I told, no, next year we will be candidates. If is everything okay, we'll be members in 2004. And he said, it's okay, it's no problem. And there's no problem was not reflected in their media. Or now Sweden and Finland, if you remember this, of course, everybody remembers the speech of Putin on the eve of 24th of February, when he told that no more expansion of NATO and so on and so forth, and NATO should come back to 97 borders, and it was drama, right? And then suddenly he realized that Sweden and Finland probably will be, it's not so easy, but nevertheless, it's irreversible. And then they said, it's okay, it's up to them, it's not a big problem. It's exactly the same going on now. They will use any opportunity when they feel that they really can split us, divide, make some conflict. But if they feel that we are united, if it's irreversible, they will stop and invent another item for the bluffing, which is also the case. So nuclear, I don't know, probably military people can say more, but this tactical nuclear weapon will change nothing in the military field, basically, but will be huge, painful consequences politically. It's enough already for Kremlin. They're already losing their associates, their friends, believers, already losing in our eyes. And if they will really manage to do that, they will achieve nothing, but they will definitely cut themselves from anything which was considered as kind of possible alliance in the future. So really, I cannot say that I can really say that 100% they will not do that. Of course, nobody will tell that. Probability is very low, but any threats should be taken seriously, but it shouldn't change our attitude, it shouldn't change our stance, and we shouldn't hesitate in supporting Ukraine. It cannot be any pause, otherwise it will be really defeat. It will be defeat, and for them it will be really temporary victory, some pause to regain power and continue with the war. And one more point, now they're pretending that they are really ready to negotiate for the peace, which looks very, very attractive to many, but in fact they are trying to seize these territories which they captured illegally. They would like to have this pause to regain power and to continue with the war, which has nothing to do with any peace. So I'm telling obvious things which should be understandable, but unfortunately for some it's still attractive. So let's make a deal, we'll have a peace, and that's this songs were already known from the history, and I doubt it will happen. But nevertheless, we have to talk about that to prevent not to be fooled in the future.
Elon Musk made it attractive last 24 hours, so probably yes. Mr. Milov, can you add something to this discussion? Do you think it can be the next step? Unfortunately,
the using weapon.
The next and the last.
Well, first, as February 24th taught us, we've got to be prepared, even for a small possibility. Many people did not believe, including myself, actually, because I was widely commenting that the status of Russian army is so poor that it will be insane to invade. But Putin did it, so we got to have a response plan to every opportunity. However, I would agree with Minister Linkevičius that the military advantages from using a tactical nuclear weapon are negligible. However, there will be a lot of other negative consequences, not only the international reaction, but if you remember Chernobyl in 1986, all adjacent Russian areas have a risk of being contaminated, and these are, for once, the most important agricultural producing regions. Krasnodar and Rostov, which are being shut down in terms of airspace right now, are the biggest agricultural producers, as well as Belgorod and Bryansk. So Putin will shoot himself, not even in the food, but maybe in some other vital organs, So I think, and if we're talking about like a strategic all-out war, I would recommend to read, it's very easy to Google in Russian, Dmitry Rogozin, Russia will lose a war to America in 6 hours. 9 years ago, in 2013, Rogozin was a deputy prime minister. He given a lecture explaining how 90% of Russia's strategic potential will be destroyed just in a few hours, and Putin and Russian top officials are very much aware of that weakness. So I think it's just a bluff, but we got to be prepared.
Okay, let's move to the next point. And starting, I would like to quote the Russian author, Sergei Medvedev, who wrote in his book, The Return of the Russian Leviathan, a memory. He shared a memory. He was raised in Moscow, and there was a story about the child that is going to the toy store and asking for a globe of Soviet Union. So my question and my point is, having that on mind, is the war in Ukraine Putin's war or Russia's war? How should we see people who are fleeing Russia now because they don't want to go to the military? Should we invite them or rather have some security concerns? Mr. Röttgen.
I would say that this war certainly started as Putin's war. I think more or less nobody had a great appetite of waging war against Ukraine within the society, and I would say even across the military elite of the country. And I think at the center of this war, why it started, is very much Putin's obsession to establish again a Russian empire in Europe and with power beyond Europe. I think his ambition, his determination and obsession, his obsessive ambition has been to rewrite history and to rectify the outcome of the Cold War. I think he wants to implement this historic will and restore Russia as it has been before, and I think this is what has motivated him. Over the course of the war, I think the Russian propaganda has been, again, quite successful in embroiling a lot of people in this war effort, particularly because of the fact that so far in the first months, this war was observed by Russian TV observers, but it was not waged by Russians, but by ethnic minorities. So they were more or less the TV viewers of this war and not the participants, not the soldiers. And with the partial mobilization, he has changed this, for example. This also has turned out to be extremely counterproductive, because now Russians have become scared to get embroiled in this war. And of course, the atrocities which have been committed, this has spread this originally Putin war to a kind of Russian war. We have to be clear about that. However, we have to wait and see, and have to be very cautious and very observant to this development. If the current situation were to continue and we were to see first what we are already seeing, a gradual collapse and perhaps then a sudden collapse of the Russian army, I think there will be a desire for a scapegoat. And this will very much then perhaps turn again from a Russian war into a Putin war and the likes of him. So this is perhaps a development we are going to see. The military weakness seems to continue on the Russian side, and then we will, when we have to start and have to already have in our minds what is our idea of a future relationship. And regarding the future relationship with Russia, and we do not know which Russia will evolve out of a possible military catastrophe in the Russian eyes. I think we have to take this question, is it a Putin war or a Russia war, have to take in mind this question. And of course, the Russian society, Russia as a nation, will not disintegrate. Perhaps the Russian state may disintegrate. This may be a political outcome, a historic outcome out of this war, but we have to take in mind that there is a future with Russia as a society. And for this reason, I think we have to outline and stress the authorship and the responsibility of Putin and the collective elite of this country.
Hanna.
So first, I want to react that saying that it's barbaric act, we have to tell the truth. What's happening in Ukraine, Russia is committing a genocide. Russia should be designated as a state sponsor of terrorism. First. And I would like to see that the representatives of Russian opposition or others also join us in condemning and recognizing that this is a genocide. This will be fair. Second, I also would like to react on the weapons we are receiving from Germany, because modern NATO standard Leopard tanks are not in Ukraine. And what I heard in Berlin, that we want to help Ukraine to win, but Russia not to lose. I never seen a half-pregnant woman. I'm sorry. So this is really important. If you really want to help Ukraine to win, please give us modern weapons and help Ukrainian fighters to guarantee that every inch of Ukrainian territory are free. Because in the liberated recently territories, what we've seen in Izum, it's even worse than what we've seen in Bucha, in Mariupol. And for Ukraine, it's not about territories. It's about saving lives of people, which are every hour facing atrocities, facing rapes, kids, and others. So we have to stop Russians killing Ukrainians. And actually, because this is my probably 8 times at the Warsaw Security Forum. I remember how we started. Only peaceful settlement, only political diplomatic way. We will not provide Ukraine with javelins and others. And so what? Now we are discussing about genocide. And now we're also hearing that Ukraine will receive the weapons at the level which is enough for negotiations, which will strengthen Ukrainian position to negotiate. We don't need to negotiate. Russia has to capitulate, and international tribunal and also reparations is like post-war Germany. It's the only way to democratize. And I don't want to hear about another conditions for negotiations. It's not a time for negotiations. 95% of Ukrainians believe that we are winning, and defeat of Russia, totalitarian regime, it's in the interest of the whole world. It's in the interest of the Indo-Pacific region, where is another authoritarian regime just waiting when to attack another society or countries and others. So I think it's really important to learn the lessons that we need weapons at the scale or the level that we will liberate Ukrainian territories according to the internationally recognized borders, which includes also Crimea. And answering on your also questions, when I mentioned President Zelensky's speech or address, it was not an address to Russian people. It was the address to indigenous peoples living in the territory of Russian Federation, which is now a prison of nations. And our president, when he was addressing, he was staying in the center of Kiev, where Imam Shamil, the hero of Dagestan, and the entire Caucasus lived in 1860s. As you can see, Ukraine knows how to honor the heroes of Dagestan. And what are the heroes in current Russia? It's a cult of Stalin. In the Red Square, you could see whom you could see, Lenin and Stalin. So Russian society are honoring people who are responsible for genocide, which happened last century. So let's not talk about Putin, because in Ukraine, when Yanukovych was attempted to turn Ukraine into the dictatorship, so we stopped him and he left country. So we didn't allow Yanukovych to turn Ukraine to authoritarianism. Russian society allowed Kremlin to turn to totalitarian regime. So, and by the way, one of the famous leaders of Putin is Peter the Great. Peter the Great, who renamed Moscovia into Russia, stealing the name of Rus, Kiev Rus. And I do believe that everyone who visited Kiev, you've seen St. Sophia Cathedral, one of the most beautiful and ancient. When St. Sophia Cathedral was built, Russia didn't exist. So from Peter the Great, Soviet Union, and now Russia, it's not about regime change. It's about the imperialistic nature of Russian statehood. So this is the key questions. We have to prepare a strategy, and I'm really thankful to some brave experts and generals like Ben Hodges, who already mentioning that we have to call in for starting to prepare for the collapse of Russia for a number of reasons, and to reduce the geopolitical consequences on these processes. So don't be afraid. Let me quote President Biden, and actually I'm very thankful to Western supply, but without fighting spirit of Ukrainian army, which is key, and we will win this time. And actually, those who are delaying with weapons will be guilty for many deaths, which we could prevent. Thank you.
Hanna, thank you. Hanna, thank you. You've made a clear point, and maybe my question is to Vladimir Milov, because Hanna was talking about it. After the collapse of Soviet Union, there was no decommunization process in Russia, no punishment for Soviet crimes. Maybe this is this is why Russians are so susceptible to propaganda, and they don't see the connection between great Russia and great crime.
This is actually part of the problem, indeed, that there was no decommunization. But let's not oversimplify. I'm going to suggest you to go back 20 years ago. 20 years ago, over 70% of Russians had positive attitude of the United States of America. 20 years ago, a majority of Russians, according to opinion polls, wanted to apply for a membership of the European Union. 20 years ago, Vladimir Putin, and this is a direct quote, I recently made a video about that for my YouTube channel, which has now 250,000 views. Vladimir Putin was speaking in Rome when they signed the joint Rome Declaration with NATO, speaking about the joint security space between Vancouver and Vladivostok, that is a direct quote from Putin, overwhelmingly supported by the majority of the Russian population, which is true, which it was at the time being. Now, I agree that, listen, Russians will have now to go a long way, a long, hard way to actually prove that this is Putin's war and not their war. I agree with that. The ball is on our court. This is for the Russians to prove. But I know Russia very well. I'm 50 years old. I traveled like 80% of the Russian regions. I literally talked and shook hands with tens of thousands of people. I think I know something about my country, and my country doesn't support this. If you go around the streets of like any major city, you would see that the anti-war graffiti is present very heavily. You can spot it. But these Z Nazi symbols on cars and elsewhere, they're just bare minimum. Mostly inflicted by the administrations and so on. There is no bottom-up movement for support of Putin's imperialist policies and his war. Why did Putin announce the mandatory mobilization in the first place in September? Because he was trying to lure people in to go voluntarily recruit for a significant money and go to fight. But he failed. Nobody went. So I think it's complicated. Yes, I agree that Russia will have to prove that it's not as imperialistic country as the world sees it right now. But I know that the good signs are there. And our mission, the mission of myself and the colleagues from the opposition, is that we are talking to Russians. We have millions and millions in daily audiences, and it matters. Public opinion is shifting. Russians are getting out of this propaganda and disinformation bubble that Putin tried to lock themselves in. It's not an easy process, sometimes can be ugly, but there's no other way to go, because if Russia does not become a democratic state which adheres to the rule of law and international order, rule-based order, it will always come back and attack somebody. It's the only way to go to try to make it a modern democratic country. Is it possible? I don't know. No guarantees. But we should keep trying, and it's the only way.
Thank you. And Mr. Röttgen, do you see the need of Russian Nuremberg? Russian Nuremberg.
Nuremberg. Look, if I take what you told about your compatriots, about your country, that it is essential to build a democratic Russia obeying by the rule of law, then we have to bear the responsibility as the European neighbors of Russia. How could we contribute to this development in Russia, while being absolutely clear about that this is not what we can essentially influence, but it's completely up to the Russian people to decide upon their fate. And I think they would not like us to interfere in their internal development. But however, if you look back into history, and I hate the historic parallels, but if you have a look at on the German history, the international treatment with German guilt in the First World War was not a recipe for building peace. So, and I would be very cautious in organizing. So, there are conflicts, let me put it that way. Of course, there are huge atrocities. Hanna has outlined it. And this is not in the first place a matter of sentiment, but of realities. People have been killed. They have been slaughtered. They have been raped, and all the injustices that happened. But we have to bear in mind that there is perhaps even a dilemma, a terrible conflict between justice and peace. And we have not yet started to think about that. Perhaps, rightly so, it might be a little bit premature. But I think it's not far away that we have to start about thinking, discussing, preparing for such conflicts as one between justice, by establishing international courts, and what could be our contribution to a peaceful coexistence and to a development within Russia that cannot be based on defying and lying about the past. But you have to win over the future by developing a democratic, rules-based Russia. I think this is the absolute core of the future peace of Europe.
Mr. Linkevičius, would you like to add something to this, or rather tell us if you see the place for or lessons that Russia can take from the former Soviet Union parts, from countries?
Not coming to my mind, not lessons what Russia should take, but what lessons we have to learn, which was unlearned. It was the endless process of appeasement, of so-called dialogue, which led nowhere, covering non-willingness to act and even non-ability to influence the situation. And when Kasia Pisarska quoted Einstein during her speech, you remember that the world is dangerous not because of these bad people, but because of those people which are not preventing those bad people from acting. And this is exactly the case. We have to change our mindset. And we have to understand that it's not just we're discussing what Russia will do, what Putin will do. Let's discuss what we should do. We cannot give up, you know. We cannot tolerate what is happening, basically. We have to learn unlearned lessons, which started not on February 24, and even not during annexation of Crimea, even earlier. Occupation of 20% of Georgia. Nothing happened. Chechnya, anything. And you know, this is something where we're listening from the outset, that we were always handful of those which were not agreeing and trying to convince our colleagues, let's be consistent. Why Russia should respect our decisions, which we are not respecting ourselves, our decisions. That was the case. If we look at the situation of occupation of Georgia, for instance, right? So what I'm coming to mind, this is really unlearned lessons of the West, and there is not enough to acknowledge, but it's also important not to repeat. Not to repeat. And here it's a moment of truth. It's really, really very important now situation, and if I hope we will succeed. I hope we will continue with the sustainable support for Ukraine. Financial, military, diplomatic, political, sustainable. It's very important. Not to give up, not to make any pause. And also very important to understand one day that when we are saying and claiming each other that, look, Ukraine must win. Of course must win. We all wish Ukraine to win. But there we should realize that Russia must lose. Otherwise, it's not possible. And those who still hesitate and afraid that Russia will lose too badly, or something like that, this explains sometimes resistance to support Ukraine sufficiently. This is really a decisive moment. We have to understand that Kremlin will not change unless painfully lose.
Mr. Röttgen, what do you think about this point?
No, I agree with that. I think I do not want to explain the reluctance and hesitance to be clear on that. And I do not want to be partisan either. But the German Chancellor says Ukraine must not lose. Ukraine must not lose and Russia must not win. But he doesn't say the two other sentences, which is Ukraine must win. And this means that Russia must lose on the Ukrainian battlefield. This is a clarity we have to deliver. And this clarity is required in order to draw the proper consequences out of this. There is no way to compromise on that. If there is, and we absolutely agree on this, there is a brutal, illegal war waged against a neighborhood country for pure reasons of power grabbing and the obsession to establish an empire. And this is completely illegal and has to be rejected. And this is the only way to do that and to achieve a political solution at the end of the day, which we alluded to, which is the re-establishment of the European peace order, which was violated and left by Russia not in 2022, but in 2014. This has a military precondition, and this is that Ukraine wins this war, which has been aggressively, illegally fought against Ukraine, and for this reason, Russia has to win. This is a clarity which can't be avoided and must not be avoided. I completely agree with that.
Okay, we are run out of time, so I think that we have time for our last question, and I would like to ask this question firstly to Mr. Milov. What is the situation of Russian opposition? So what next after Putin?
I think we should make a clear connection that many people are very disappointed, to say the very least, that there are no major protests in Russia. But we should make a clear connection. We now know why the organized opposition was destroyed last year in 2021. We now more or less understand that this was done as a pretext to make sure that there's no organized anti-war movement when Putin attacks Ukraine. Opposition has a hard time because it cannot operate on the ground. FSB, Russian Security Service, immediately cracks down on, even some small-scale, relatively vegetarian protest activity in the regions. However, we are effectively, because of the information technology and social media, we are pretty effectively operating from abroad. And as a matter of fact, if you want to talk about Russian opinion polling data, one of the major features since the beginning of the war is that trust and viewership of the state-run media has collapsed to unprecedented lows. By all major pollsters, it's about 25–30% now. Complete trust in state television. It's about halved since February. And we are competing for audience with them, broadcasting from abroad, doing a job which Voice of America and Radio Liberty did in the 70s and 80s. So we try to wake society up. It's a painful process because of extreme repression, but eventually you will see Russians coming to the streets and protesting.
Hanna, would you like to add something in the end?
So as an optimist, of course, I would like to share my dreams. And one day in the Red Square in Moscow, there will be two memorials. One for genocide organized by Stalin, and second organized by Russian Federation. And this will happen because together with International Tribunal compensations, and I would refer to the World War II, when post-war Germany paid a lot, not I would refer to World War I. So, and now we are seeing Germany as a member of NATO, EU and others. So this is important also, all this punishment, not just for Kremlin totalitarian regime, but also Russian society should also pay reparations. But also in 1991, the Soviet Union disintegration was a defeat of communism, but not the defeat of colonialism, not the defeat of imperialism. So I think we have to learn the lessons from the Soviet Union collapse. And now by developing a strategy on Russia also, which includes different scenarios. And this goes to my second dream. Since I'm on the sanctions, Russian sanctions, but I believe that one day I will visit Tatarstan, Bashkortostan, Udmurtia, because I have lots of people who are fighting with regimes, who are with Ukraine, not with Russia in the genocide against us. And all these people in exile in different EU countries, in US. And I do believe that next year at the Warsaw Security Forum, besides opposition voices, we will hear also the voices of indigenous people. Like Chechnya, after Soviet Union collapse, they proclaimed independence. And in return, they received genocide. And I do believe that we will also condemn this genocide and will help. And I'm also very thankful to people from Chechnya who are now fighting with Ukrainian armed forces, not Kadyrov's guys. And, you know, when I saw Putin signing something, it's like this farce just a week ago, I was thinking about that one day in Kiev, there will be ceremony of signing agreement, bilateral agreement with independent states after prison of nation empire will be disintegrating.
Well, at least I wish your dreams will come true. Thank you for your time. Hanna, Hopko, Linas, Linkevičius, Vladimir, Milov, Norbert, Röttgen. Thank you.